Hello, this is an e-learning lesson on The Widow's Lament in Springtime by William Carlos Williams. Before we get started, make sure that you have downloaded the notes page, which includes the text of the poem. Fill out all of the header information, including the essential questions and the skills target. The essential questions are: how does the poem reflect modernist elements? And what poetic devices does the poet employ? The skills we are targeting today is to connect the development of central ideas across several texts and to annotate a poem for form. You can pause this video here to get the information filled in. Before we read the poem, think about the title and do a quick write. A lament is a passionate expression of grief, so not a Minnesota funeral, but weeping and wailing. A widow, just to be clear, is a woman whose spouse has died. The male version is a widower, by the way. Irony is when what you expect and what actually happens do not match. For example, you expect a wedding to be happy, so a sad wedding is ironic. So, knowing those, how is the title of the poem, The Widow's Lament in Springtime, potentially ironic, considering the connotations of spring? Write a few solid sentences making clear the expectations around a poem set in springtime and the disconnect with a lament. Pause the video here while you write. I'm going to read through these quickly, but you can pause the video to paraphrase 3 biographical notes that might relate to William Carlos Williams' work as a modernist poet. He was born on September 17, 1883. He actually lived till 1963. He died the same year as Robert Frost. He had an English father and a Puerto Rican mother of French, Dutch, Spanish, and Jewish ancestry. His family provided him with the background in art and literature. He pursued math and science in high school, but did enjoy literature and writing. He went to the University of Pennsylvania and studied medicine. He was a doctor for more than 40 years in the state of New Jersey. In that time, he delivered approximately 2,000 babies. Many of his patients weren't even aware that he was writing. He was a friend of Ezra Pound, who we also saw in the Frost biography. Williams once said that before meeting Pound is like BC and AD, meaning before and after a major event. Carlos Williams' poetry is very centered on everyday circumstances of lives and lives of common people. We'll hear more about that later. Randall Jarrett, who is another poet, said that Williams' poetry is remarkable for its empathy, sympathy, and its muscular and emotional identification with subjects. There is no optimistic blindness in Williams. So we're going to quickly review the modernist elements from the Fire and Ice video. Disillusionment is about having your dreams shattered. The world isn't what you wanted it to be. People were also questioning religion, and with that, of having a feeling of spiritual emptiness. People were also feeling alienated, meaning that they did not belong or felt even isolated in very familiar surroundings. Form-wise, there was also some break with what poems and stories looked like traditionally. The language was also less elevated, more like the talk around us every day. There was also a change in what a poem or a story could be about. More experiences or objects were considered worthy of writing about. William Carlos Williams worked in a subset of modernist poetry called IMAGISM. IMAGISM is characterized by very simple language, but very precise word choice. Images are concrete. Again, there's this common element, images that most people can relate to or see. Unlike Frost, Williams totally played tennis with no net. He wrote in free verse, in which there is not a pattern of end rhyme or regular meter. These are not toe tappers. And finally, anything can be the subject of a poem. Williams' most famous poem is about a wheelbarrow, and my favorite is about some plums that his wife had been saving, but he ate. So we're going to read through the poem, and the first time I just want you to focus on modernist elements. So I'm going to read along. You can either follow along in the video or read on your notes, but the idea is to note for some of those modernist elements that we were just discussing. Sorrow is my own yard, where the new grass flames as it has flamed often before, but not with the cold fire that closes round me this year. 35 years I lived with my husband. The plum tree is white today with masses of flowers. Masses of flowers load the cherry branches and color some bushes yellow and some red, but the grief in my heart is stronger than they, for though they were my joy formerly, today I notice them and turn away forgetting. Today my son told me that in the meadows, at the edge of the heavy woods in the distance, he saw trees of white flowers. I feel that I would like to go there and fall into those flowers and sink into the marsh near them. Now that we're through once, I want you to go back and pull some of those lines to focus on specific modernism elements and analyze them in a table. I've given you an example here. I took my text from lines 11 and 19 through 20. Masses of flowers, they were my joy formerly. I remember that masses has more than one meaning. It can mean bunches or a lot of, but it also what several Christian religions call their worship ceremonies. Because the speaker is no longer finding happiness in those flowers or services, it occurred to me that this could also be about a loss of religious belief, which certainly can happen after a traumatic event like the death of a spouse. Now pause the video and add 3 more examples of modernism or imagism in your notes. For the second read, you are going to focus on the form of the poem. On this slide, I have listed some poetic devices, all of which are either in the poem or are not in the poem, and that is important. You are going to pause the video and annotate the poem in your notes for all of these devices. If something is lacking, please explain what that lack means. To complete this assignment, you are going to write briefly, comparing the speaker in this poem to one of the characters that we have read previously. I want you to do this to connect these poems to the work we've done before, because these are not isolated. The stories and poems are contemporaneous. For example, you might choose to write about how the speaker in this poem and the character in one of our earlier stories both feel alienated because they're unable to talk about how they really feel because of their circumstances. Or you can talk about how the character in this poem is skeptical about religion, especially at a time when it could support them, and compare that to the characters in one of our modernist stories or one of your choice books. You may pause the video to work on this writing. Finally, for this assignment, you are going to write comparing the form of this poem, The Widow's Lament, to the form of one of the Frost poems, Road Not Taken, Fire and Ice, or Out Out. There will be both similarities and differences in the forms. After you have finished both essential question responses, submit the work and check in with me.